to engage. Now let me introduce Uma. Uma Viswanathan is the founding executive director of the New Pluralist Collaborative, which is a collaboration between funders like JTF and other funders, as well as field leaders, people who actually do work out in our communities to strengthen a culture of pluralism in the United States. She brings 15 years of experience leading, advising, and investing in collective forms of leadership to build greater equity, inclusion, and belonging. She was previously a program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and at the Kellogg Foundation. And she has, both in those roles and in other roles, she has worked in and led social justice movements and led an effort to bring critical resources to Haiti. At the New Pluralist Collaborative, Uma has overseen the development of a truly collaborative effort to heal divides, build bridges, and cultivate belonging. Since its beginning, just 3 years ago, the New Pluralist Collaborative has distributed $20 million in grants to practitioners engaged in pluralism. They have developed a theory of change. What are we doing? What are we hoping to accomplish? And how are we going to get there? And they have built a community of funders who know each other personally, and are engaged in helping new pluralists figure out how to do their work or to provide advice. And field builders, those who are running organizations, working in our communities across the United States, trying to build bridges through a variety of different sectors and in circumstances that can be very difficult. And those field builders have opportunities to come together and get to know each other. So as a result, Uma has become a bit of a spokesperson for pluralism in the United States, specifically within philanthropy, reaching out to those who are interested in this topic by writing articles, participating in webinars, and appearing in podcasts. And this January, she was selected by Thinkers 50 as one of 30 management and business thinkers to watch in the coming year. And I'll just close with this quote from a blog post at New Pluralist Collaborative that Uma wrote as she stepped into this executive director role. If democracy is grounded in open discourse and exchange of ideas, our democracy is balancing on a thin wire. Not just the institutions of democracy, but our belief in the social experiment that started just a few centuries ago. It's time to examine our hearts, but it takes courage to do that. It takes courage to stand against the powerful currents that are tearing us apart. Yet being together does not mean we can patch over our deep wounds or avert our eyes to hard truths. Being together requires that we have faith in others who see things differently and are willing to replace old habits with new patterns. It takes courage to change and be changed. It takes hope to heal. So Uma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. I've gotten to work very closely with a number of you. What I was so excited about this opportunity was actually not speaking as the executive director of New Pluralist alone, although that is always part of the role that I play, but to actually give you a window into how I see the world. I'm Hindu, and this is a deep orientation. This is a worldview that guides how I lead New Pluralists. It guides how I understand the work of pluralism and how I move through the world and make choices. So it's a bit tender. I don't always get to show this side of myself, particularly in professional spaces. So I just want to thank you for allowing me the space to just explore these topics. It was actually fun to think about how I would put together this talk. So I'm actually going to start off by reading a quote from my teacher. One who is not amazed by the magnificence of this creation, his eyes are not yet opened. Once your eyes are open, they close, and this is called meditation. Tell me, what in this creation is not a mystery? Birth is a mystery. Death is a mystery. If both birth and death are mysteries, then life is certainly a greater mystery, isn't it? Being completely immersed in the mystery of life and in this creation is samadhi. Your knowing or believing does not really matter to what is. The creation is an unfathomable secret, and its mysteries only deepen. So this is a quote from my teacher, Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. He's been my teacher for the past almost 20 years. He's a part of a lineage of teachers dating back thousands of years who are carrying on the Vedic tradition. These are the very roots of what we know to be Hinduism. And as his disciple, as his student, my path has been a discovery of this mystery, this great mystery, this unfathomable secret called love. And I think one of the things that I have come to absorb into myself is that it is not just about understanding, it's actually about experience. So I'm actually going to invite us to really experience this talk together. This is why there's no slides, right? This may feel a little different, but I'm going to be inviting us at certain moments to actually close our eyes and fully engage with the experience of this tradition. So this mystery, this unfolding of seeing the world is woven into my own fabric, right? It's how I make choices, how I make meaning of things. Sometimes big choices, moments in my life, in my career, where I felt something deep in my gut that has told me this is not the right way, time to take a leap. That's actually how I took the leap into New Pluralists. I was deeply engaged in the work of racial justice and social justice, and there was something inside of me that was telling me that the way that I was experiencing the language of othering and breakage, this notion that half the country is evil and we need to win out against them. There was something about that deep inside of me told me this is not the way. This is not the way that I see the world. This is not the way that I hold the hearts of other people. And so I took that leap of faith to lead this baby organization, only 2 years old, actually. We are a toddler still. Yes. To lead this thing, this construct, pluralism. What is this? What does this actually mean? And it is actually my grounding in the fabric of my own spirituality that gave me that trust in myself, that trust in the goodness of the people that I'm working with, that we could do this. Right? It's also in small actions, daily choices that I make, that this way of looking at the world informs and influences who I am. And I think this is actually what can make it very difficult for Hinduism to show up in a lot of interfaith spaces. Because in a lot of ways, when you think about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, these are religions. There's a certain way in which we conceptualize what a religion is. It's often separated from the other dimensions of life, economics, business, right, art. There's all of these different dimensions of life, and religion fits into a particular part of that life, the way that society is constructed. But Hinduism actually expresses itself in all of the choices that we make. So when my husband and I got married, we got married in the traditional Vedic way, and we made commitments to the natural environment. We made commitments to who we would be in society, how we would show up in our friendships with other people, how we would step on the earth and walk through the earth. This is all like the way that you design buildings, there are Vedic scriptures about this. The ways in which you decide how resources get allocated. All of this is actually part of Hinduism. And so it can be very difficult, I've experienced showing up in interfaith space where the questions are, when do you go to temple? How frequently do you go to temple? Where's your minister? These don't fit into the frame of what it is to be a Hindu, right? It's the way in which we orient our gaze to the nature of reality. That is what it actually means to be Hindu. So the way that my eyes formed, right? This has to do with, I grew up, you can tell by my accent, I grew up here. I was born and brought up in New York. A suburb of New York City in Westchester. And like a lot of Hindu American parents, my parents strived to raise us, to be able to enable us to feel a deep sense of connection to these roots. And so back in the 80s, they sent me and my sister by ourselves as children across the globe to India, where every summer we would spend 3 months without them, with our family there. And again, it was in the being in that environment and absorbing the ways in which people process things, the way people make decisions together, that taught us these lessons that it's not just about us, that we are part of an interconnected whole, that there's a certain divinity that exists in all of creation that we honor. There's even ceremonies that you do when you buy a new car, where you actually treat the car with reverence. There's like a certain ceremony that you do because it's something that is going to be an important part of your family, right? So we absorbed all of this as little children, and it just informed it. This is how you be in relationship with the world. You see yourself as part of a whole. And then came back home, and I just remember every night, from before I even think I could talk, we would go down to our puja table. It's an altar where we have all of these murtis, these representations of different gods and goddesses. And we would light the oil lamp every night, and that oil lamp, that light itself signifies the light inside of you. It's a recognition and an awakening of, okay, now we're putting our attention, we're putting our gaze on this. And I would watch my mom take the incense and kind of show it to all of these. And it's the sharing of the fragrance of this devotion that we have to God. And each of these gods and goddesses, they invoke a different quality of divinity. We would chant in Sanskrit. I started chanting when I was about 4 years old. I would remember you just sort of absorb these Sanskrit chants. They become part of you in some way. So there was just something about, again, this is all getting transmitted not through words. These aren't necessarily things that my parents were saying, okay, now we're doing this for these particular reasons. There's so much about the Hindu way of life that you just absorb. You absorb in these gestures, you absorb in these choices. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad was going through a really rough patch at work. Like he was just feeling, he was kind of in a really down place. And I know my mom was really struggling to figure out how to support him. I was pretty young at that time, so they wouldn't like talk to me about what was going on. But when you're a kid, you have that sort of hazy awareness that there's like something not quite right going on here. And I remember seeing my mom just frequently going down to the puja table. And it was one of those things where she was showing this is a legitimate way to be able to process things. And this is what it means that the divinity is here for you. Let me surrender. Let me offer. Let me let go. Let me ask for help. And she showed that to us as really young children, that this is a way. This is a way to be able to move through the world. And that is bhakti. So bhakti is a Sanskrit word that means devotion, right? So this is a particular way in which love is expressed in the Hindu tradition is through bhakti. And there's actually entire traditions or entire lineages, approaches, practices that are rooted in how to invoke that quality of devotion inside of us. And the beautiful thing is that that love is understood, that love that we have for divinity, for universe, for God, whatever you want to say, can actually take on the many expressions that we're used to in our own lives. So there's actually a scripture called the Bhakti Sutras that actually describes a relationship that you can have with God as your mother, or as your friend, or as your teacher, or as your own child, as a master, as a servant, that there are all of these different dimensions that we can have in our own relationship with consciousness, with divinity itself. And that familiarity, it's like through our everyday relationships, we're learning how to practice that kind of love. And so by invoking that, we can connect in a different way with the spirituality that's all around us, with the aliveness that's all around us. So I'm going to invite us to experience a little bit of bhakti for ourselves. All right, so I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and just reflect on all of the people in your life who have shown you love throughout your life. You might even go back into your childhood. Reflect on a caregiver, a parent, a family member. And moving through your life, the friendships that you've had. They may not even be in your life right now, but those instances of love that was expressed and received, they're still inside of you. Reflecting on the love you have for your children, if you have children, or nieces, nephews, that quality of love. Reflecting on the love that your teachers express to you, the people who have guided you, mentored you, bringing them into your consciousness, into your awareness. Thinking of the love that this creation has for you, the love that nature has for you. The way that trees provide us with shade, provide us with fruit and wood, clean air to breathe. The way the water loves us. It flows, it courses through our bodies, cleanses and purifies the planet. The way that birds sing, allow us to enjoy their song. The way the flowers bloom, fragrant. All of this is love. Love is not just an emotion. It's our very existence. It's woven throughout all of creation. And the more that we see this, the more that we experience this, it allows our life to be an expression of that love. We're looking all over here and there, trying to find love. It's like a fish swimming in the ocean, trying to find the ocean. Just letting go, recognizing this love, becoming aware of this love. That's bhakti. We can open our eyes. This is also known as the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality. So this is another path towards love in Hinduism. It's the word jnana. Jnana means the truth, wisdom traditions. So this is another way in which people come closer and closer to the understanding of the ultimate reality that Brahman, the substratum of all of consciousness, is love. Not is loving, but is the actual phenomenon of love. And it can take different distortions. You know, sometimes we experience a lot of pain and hardship. We see it all around us. These are actually understood to be distortions of love. Hatred is considered love flipped upside down. Anger is love of perfection, right? And when we become aware of the ways in which we're getting caught up and snagged along the way, that awareness alone allows us to be freed from the distortion, and we can flip it back into love in some way, right? We don't have to cultivate this thing, right? It's not a hard thing. It's actually removing the barriers, removing the obstacles that get in the way of us tapping into our own true nature, which is love, which is this expression of love. And we don't have to try to love another, right? This is another core construct within the Vedic tradition, within Hinduism, is this idea of non-duality, right? And this is how I hold pluralism. So this is a little secret for those of you, right? This idea of non-duality. It's not saying oneness and it's not two-ness. It's non-two-ness. It's this idea that underneath the fabric of everything, there is one loving consciousness, and that consciousness expresses itself in infinite diversity. And those two things coexist, just like a wave can exist in the ocean, right? It can be its own independent wave, and it is yet still of the ocean. And so the idea of saying, I love another is like saying, my right hand loves my left hand, right? It's one body. This is belonging. This is the ultimate form of belonging, and belonging is where love begins. And it is out of that sense of belonging that we take responsibility for what's around us. And this is how service fits in to the yogic path, the path of the Vedas. Love expresses itself through service, right? It's not just service to another. There isn't a separation there, but it is actually this natural action that we take when we feel a deep sense of belonging. When we experience the pain of another, it's not just the pain of another, we experience it in our own bodies as well, right? That sense of compassion that we have, it's because we are that other person, right? There is no other. And so we naturally act in accordance with that. And it is when we get out of that rhythm, that's when we get stuck. That's when we start to create these hierarchies that we see playing out, is when we believe that we are not actually one. And so on the deepest level, being able to disentangle us from these hierarchies, to me, this is the ultimate dharmic. Like, this is why, for me, taking on this role, leading New Pluralists, is actually a natural expression of my own spiritual path, of my own journey, is to do this. Right? We can make it so complicated, right, by trying to understand it in our heads, but there's actually something about just simply feeling it, just simply experiencing it. And the more that we actually go inward, the more that we start to see, meditation. I've been meditating and teaching meditation now for about 15 years. And this is where a lot of times we think of meditation as sort of this dry thing, like I'm going to almost clinically observe what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body. Meditation is really juicy, right? It's something that allows us to tap into this expanded river of love that flows underneath us. And it is from that place, then we go out into the world and we're able to see things with the eyes of love. So this is the foundation of what has formed my eyes, and I'm so grateful to have been able to share it with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma, for sharing insights about yourself as well as insights about your tradition. And for those who have read Sir John, which I think all of us have at some level, really affirming to hear some actual words that he uses appear in your talk, which I don't think you are aware of, but he refers to God as ultimate reality.
Okay.
Throughout his writing, it kind of changes. He starts using the word God, but then ultimately his later books refer to God as ultimate reality. And then he also, did anyone else catch the other reference? That's kind of a Sir John reference. A wave in the ocean.
Oh, really?
So that's another image that he uses. And we didn't talk about that when we planned this, and that just sort of emerged.
No, it actually comes out of Vedic scriptures, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and I don't think, he doesn't reference Vedic scriptures as much. He does, but not as much as other sources. So,
I mean, I think we also probably just see it when we're looking at the ocean. Like it doesn't have to be, it could just be our experience. It's experience, yeah.
Right, and of course we all know that Sir John lived near an ocean, and that's where he exercised every day too. So, Uma, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your background and how the Hindu faith and spirituality showed up in your childhood, in your family life. You've already shared a little bit about that, but what did it mean to you then as a child, and what does it mean to you now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's now that I'm, in my mid-40s, I think I have a language and a way to be able to describe it. But there is something to growing up a part of a very small group of people that see the world this way. And how, I mean, when I was growing up, I thought that everybody either had a bar mitzvah or, went to church. Like, that to me was what everybody around me was showing me. I was curious why we didn't. I asked a ton of questions also of my parents. And I think the grace with which they handled it was so critical to me feeling like I didn't need to feel small myself in the process, and I also didn't need to other everything else. I didn't need to create a sense of superiority of my faith tradition, but that didn't also mean that I needed to seek to move away from it in some way. I think there was a way in which, through the love that my parents have of our own faith, they made us love it, right? It wasn't an obligation, it wasn't a duty to say, the pressure that I think often that you can feel when you're the child of immigrants, that we're supposed to be carrying everything from the old country here and somehow imbibe it. And therefore, anytime we miss that, we've missed something really important. And there was a way in which my parents allowed us, I think, to both treasure it, but also hold it lightly. And there was no contradiction between, I mean, definitely there were moments where it was like, you're being too American. You got to be, remember our roots. Like, I wasn't allowed to date. Didn't mean I didn't, but I wasn't allowed to.
They just didn't know about it.
They just didn't know about it. There's definitely a lot of ways in which, in my own ways, I was sort of rebelling and innovating. Like, all of that stuff was going on. But there was a lot of space, I think, that my parents gave us to find our own way into it. And I think that was something that was so critical. And also just spending time in India. I think that it's really difficult for this to make sense when you're in a dominant culture that is very different. And then to go there where this is the dominant way that you see things, there you just pick up something completely different. Yeah.
So that gives us a little picture of what it's like to grow up in the United States, given your background and your family's heritage. And the United States is becoming more diverse. But I have this sense, and you referenced this too, that monotheistic faiths tend to dominate discussions and even in interfaith practices or convenings. So how do you experience being part of those interfaith experiences? How does it impact you? How do you navigate through that? And most importantly, what is important for us to understand about the Hindu worldview and practices in the context of other faith traditions?
Yeah. Well, often Hindus aren't invited into interfaith spaces. I think it's a very often an afterthought. Hindu, Buddhist can often be added on. It's sort of like we've got the three main guys. Oh, wait, yes, let's make sure we add in somebody Buddhist or Hindu. Those are often add-ons later after the table has been set, after the conversation has been set. And so a lot of what I've experienced is needing to continually translate my experience towards a monotheistic belief system, but it isn't always the other way around. And I think that's why I so appreciated the expansive nature of being able to give this talk, because I was able to show this is what it actually looks like and feels like to approach the world in this way. I would say there's a lot more similarity between these dharmic traditions, Buddhism and Hinduism, and a lot of indigenous worldview perspectives that I think can also be on the outskirts or on the periphery of a lot of interfaith conversations. I mean, I think what's really the opportunity is these belief systems can inherently be pluralistic, because it is possible for me to be fully Hindu and fully honor the paths that other people have towards faith, because in my perspective, these are all rivers, these are all tributaries leading to the same river. And if this is what works for you, it works for you. And there's a certain way in which there's a lot of space for people to have their own paths and their own traditions. And so in a lot of ways, I look at the ways in which religions have to sort of, monotheistic religions have to sort of figure out ways to negotiate and navigate when the container is made bigger through like a more pluralistic orientation towards what spirituality is. I think it could actually open up a lot more conversation too. A lot of times I see there's like a misunderstanding of, so in temples we have pundits, right? These are people who perform certain kinds of ceremonies for the deities. Pundits are equated with like ministers in churches or priests in some way, but they actually just have a very particular, their job is to actually take care of the deity. And in fact, the temple itself, it's irrelevant whether people go to the temple, because the temple is actually a sacred site that has to do with the energy of that place being preserved. And so the job of a pundit is to honor the divinity of that space, and people are welcome to come and appreciate it. So often I'll get asked questions of like, how often do you go to temple? I'm like, I mean, does that matter? I don't know. Yeah, sure, but it's not the ultimate expression of it. In the same way, the relationship that we can have with scriptures, it's like, what's your equivalent of the Bible? And literally there are thousands and thousands and thousands of scriptures and thousands more scriptures that will be developed. And a lot of this is actually passed on through oral tradition. And so in a lot of ways, people will just say, oh, well, the Bhagavad Gita, that must be it, because that feels like it's the equivalent. And it's like, sure, the Bhagavad Gita is awesome. And there are also many, many other texts. And so the way that we even relate to wisdom and knowledge is very different. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, when the question itself is being asked.
Can you say, you talked about the fact that you meditate. How does scripture weave into that? Do you read scripture? Do you try to make your way through the books? How does that practice part of your faith practice?
Yeah, I think the way that I would describe it is the practice of meditation is what allows me to sort of repattern whatever's going on. It's like an unlocking, a letting go. And in that process, sometimes like memories can come up or strong feelings can come up. There can be a lot of internal experiences that I am processing. And then wisdom helps me make sense of what's going on. So it's sort of like experience to be able to the experience unlocks, and then the wisdom allows me to re-understand, sort of, and reframe what it is that's going on. And there's a way that scriptures, and there's definitely people who are Hindu, where scriptures are sort of just, they live on the level of the intellect as ideas. It's sort of like an analytical thing. And I think this is the beauty of like having a teacher, like a spiritual teacher, is learning that it's not just a matter of understanding wisdom, it's applying. It's all about the direct application of these principles. And so I'll sometimes find myself also when I'm churning, when I'm sort of caught up in a situation, turning to a scripture to be able to help me find and like expand my container, expand the context so that I look at it. It's like a reframe. Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit about your teacher, because I think some of us know about him, but that'd be great. And then I have 2 more questions before I open it up to
the So Gurudev Sri Sri, he's from India. He was born and brought up in South India. And his mission is to be able to bring, like, kind of refresh a lot of this wisdom and make it accessible to people in this sort of crazy modern life that we lead. Because in a lot of ways, this wisdom can be understood as something that you sort of go off into a cave and become a recluse and sort of contemplate the reality of things. And for him, it was, how do we make this helpful and useful to people, to everyday people, to business leaders, to artists, as we're sort of grappling with so much churn and change that's going on in the world. And so he actually has a following now of several millions of people across the world. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated so much, and so I teach these practices as well, is how much agency we actually have to be able to adapt and adopt this for different settings. So it's actually through being a meditation teacher, that's what brought me to Haiti, actually, where I started to really see how much trauma that people were really experiencing and how much that was getting in the way of being able to have hope or see possibilities. And so actually by providing people with these tools for inner development and to be able to process through breath work and through yoga and somatics, I started to then be able to guide them to then start to see, oh, what could we do in our community and how might we think about permaculture and sustainable food gardens and alternative energy systems. And so it was from that internal place of freedom that they were designing these different solutions. And so that was okay. Like, and I think that's one of the most incredible things about to be able to see in a leader like Gurudev is that there's something about the core, that what matters at the core, but also creating a lot of room for individual expression based on what draws us and what we care about too.
You shared with us in your comments how your faith, that the role that it plays in the work you do within pluralism, but did your faith commitments draw you into philanthropy in the first place? And if so, how? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think that part of what drew me into philanthropy was being on the other side of the table, being part of a lot of different community networks and seeing that there was a disconnect very often between the ways in which people inside of philanthropy understood the sort of messy reality of how people make stuff happen that they care about and the yearning that we have for like neat and tidy theories of change. And there was something about it that felt like it was this distancing that was going on. And I wanted to understand that. Like, I think I had a deep curiosity about what is going on inside of these walls here inside of philanthropy, because my sense was these are really good people. These are people who care. How do we better understand? How do I help bridge some of this too? And so the deeper I've gotten into philanthropy, the Kellogg Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, New Pluralism, I mean, that's been confirmed, is that there is such a yearning to be able to serve and express and care. And yet there's something, in some ways, the habits that we have as we engage and the power dynamics and the ways that they play out, that I have found my own spiritual orientation, even just being able to see my own ego get in the way, or being able to understand when somebody was getting their back up, how to like use humor or use something else to bring it down. There's a lot of ways in which doing that sort of personal spiritual development allows me to show up in a really different way within philanthropy. And I think from there also, seeing how much philanthropy can be misunderstood as like just being about money. And it's almost like this transactional relationship that we can often have with people who are doing the work in the field. Like, yes, there can be a lot of expansive language that grantees use when they say, yes, you're our partners, but sometimes we're kind of just an ATM machine. And there's something about being able to transform that dynamic. I've realized often means stretching a little bit more and actually caring about the hearts of the people that I'm engaging with. So I've had grantees who have reached out saying, I'm like burning up on the inside. Like I can keep doing this work, but I can't keep doing it in this way. It's burnout, but also there was something in the quality of the way that they were advocating that was making them feel like they were in so much pain. And then being able to actually be there as a true partner to help guide them through some difficult choices that they had to make. And there's a way in which philanthropy can truly be about like loving and caring and nurturing of people who are doing this incredible work that's so difficult. And so for me, I think that frame of being able to expand beyond just thinking about resources, a lot of that is like rooted, I think, in my faith.
Right. It's a way of manifesting love in the world.
Exactly.
So final question for me, and then we'll open the floor to colleagues in the room. So I'm often struck by the commonalities between faith traditions. Some of what you shared about the Hindu faith resonates with a lot of what I believe about from my Christian tradition, and but I know there's many, many differences. So what's the one thing that we should know about how love is understood and practiced in Hinduism, in the Hindu spiritual tradition? What would you leave us with about the role that love plays?
I mean, I think it's some of what I was talking about, that it is in all of creation, and that there is nothing that is not love in this faith tradition, and that we seek it, we find it, we express it, we turn the dial up on it, but it is actually all around us.
All right, thank you, Uma.